So let's talk about the Perfect Prep Machine by Tommy Tippee. As anyone who knows me knows, I love a gadget. I'm a big fan of things that make life easier and in this case potentially make formula preparation safer. Now the Department of Health tell us that the water needs to be a little bit over 70 degrees so that it maintains a 70-degree temperature for a couple of minutes. And this is to kill any bacteria in the powder which isn't sterile. So it's not sterile at the point of manufacture, and as soon as you open it at home, you expose it to contaminants in the environment. And this bacteria can commonly cause things like tummy bugs, gastroenteritis, but there have been outbreaks of severe illnesses like meningitis and sepsis from the bacteria found in formula. And at first glance, it appears that Tommy Tippee does follow this guidance. It delivers a hot shot of water, so a small volume of water that's hotter than 70 degrees, to kill this bacteria before the rest of the feed is made up with cold water. So to clarify, the guidance from Tommy Tippee is that an empty bottle is placed under the chute for the hot shot, an alarm sounds, and parents then have 2 minutes to add the powder. They recommend shaking to dissolve this, and then replacing it back under the spout and pressing the top. If you don't do this within 2 minutes, it advises that you discard the whole feed and start again. Now, I have to admit, I'm a little bit confused by this guidance because intuitively what would seem to make sense is that you add the powder to the bottle and then add the hot shot. If you're making up a bottle with a kettle, you would put the water in first because you're using the bottle marker as an indicator as to the amount of water that you need to add, whereas this is pre-dispensed by the machine. And if the machine allows 2 minutes, that could mean the water is actually stood for 90 seconds, a minute and a half before someone adds the powder. And during this time, that hot shot is getting cooler and cooler. But for now, let's stick to what temperature is the hot shot that's dispensed? And does it meet the guidance from the Department of Health? So according to Tommy Tippee, this shot is over 70 degrees. We tested this with a donated Perfect Prep machine, which had only been used a few times, and a digital milk thermometer, which sadly is no longer available, from Thermopen. We did repeat this experiment using the Thermopen 1, which is amazingly accurate to 0.3 degrees. And if you're making up formula and you really want to know the temperatures, this is the one to use. I'll drop a link below. So the first hot shot of the day using the milk thermometer registered 58 degrees, quite a way below the 70 odd that we were expecting. So we ran a second shot. This did get to 71 degrees, and subsequent shots evened out around the 74-75 degree mark. And anybody who owns the portafilter type of coffee machine will probably recognise this as a problem. It's an inherent problem with things that heat up water and then pass them through an internal system. The first shot of the day is always colder. So you run a couple of blank shots through the machine, this heats up the internal pipework and your shots get hotter, your coffee gets better, and in this case it seems your formula might get a bit safer. Repeated the experiment on a second day using the Thermopen 1 and found the results were very, very similar to within a degree either way. And other users echo this experience. So a study from Swansea University just this week found that 85% of the first hot shots pulled from the machine didn't reach the appropriate temperature. And this is obviously quite concerning to parents who are buying quite an expensive machine to try and replicate making the formula safely. So if we establish the hot shot is the correct temperature, does this mean the machine is safe to use? Unfortunately, it seems probably it's not that clear cut. When you heat up a kettle, a litre of water is the recommended amount. This large volume of water cools much more slowly, which is why the Department of Health recommend leaving it to cool for around 30 minutes from boiling. In contrast, the hot shot is a really small amount of water, and so we found even without adding the powder, within a minute the hottest shots had reduced that minimum temperature of 70. This meant that when we added the powder, it immediately fell below the recommended 70 degrees, and it needs to stay at this temperature for a couple of minutes to kill the bacteria. And this issue is addressed by First Steps Nutrition in their literature. They say that there's unpublished university-based research where they've contaminated milk deliberately with bacteria and found that the Perfect Prep machine didn't reduce it to untraceable levels. It was reduced, but it was still there. They also found that the correct temperature was dispensed, but after 2 minutes, it had fallen to only 60 degrees, which probably explains why all the bacteria wasn't eradicated. Now, you may remember, as I said at the beginning, the water could potentially be sat there for around 1.5 minutes before the powder's even added. And First Steps Nutrition address this too. And they cover that the same study found when the powder was added 30, 60 or 90 seconds afterwards, in some circumstances the temperature was only maintained for 5 seconds before falling to the mid-50s, which isn't going to eradicate that bacteria. There's potentially so many variables because the volume of the shot, the volume of the feed determines the size of the hot shot, and that'll obviously impact on how quickly it cools. So what this all really suggests is that even if your machine is reaching the correct temperature, there's not really any guarantee that it is going to kill all the bacteria in there. Now, is this safer than some of the methods we see promoted, particularly on Instagram from American users who dispense the powder into fancy jars and make it up with cold water? Absolutely, undoubtedly so, because it is going to reduce the levels. But if you're looking to make them up as the Department of Health advises, this is probably not the method for you. Now, if you're a perfect prep hardened user, you're not prepared to give up your machine, can you make it safer? Get yourself a good thermometer, check the temperature of the hot shots regularly, that they are getting up there. Get that powder in as soon as you can after the first beep. Not sure again, as I mentioned, why you can't put the powder in first. It does seem to be a common approach online on parenting forums, but clearly the time gap, the lag between the beep and adding the powder is also potentially significant. You also want to use that formula immediately, discard anything not drunk. You don't want to leave it sat around to allow that bacteria to multiply. We would recommend you make your formula up as per the Department of Health, and there are other gadgets and ways to make that easier. I'll cover those in a future clip. Lastly, however you choose to make your formula, don't shake it, swirl. Otherwise, you're adding unnecessary air bubbles, which can make some babies uncomfortable. Give us a like, give us a share. Hope this has helped. See you soon.